Hi. So the other day I was walking through Barnes & Noble, and in the gaming section I came across, you wouldn't believe it, get out of the way. Yeah, baby, BattleTech. I love BattleTech. If you don't know what BattleTech is, I want you to imagine your 90s children cartoons. G.I. Joe, Power Rangers, and put them together. Well, that's BattleTech. They also had a cartoon.
You dare to refuse my bajol?
The fuck you say to me, you little shit? How are you not in fucking school? You kiss your mother with that mouth? It's called you kiss your mother with.
The BattleTech name goes all the way back to the dawn of time for tabletop war games, and in many ways was the big game before Warhammer got its popularity. But after experiencing some minor copyright issues, i.e. they stole half their designs from anime, they basically died until Catalyst Game Labs recently reacquired the IP and has brought this generation the wonders of the Inner Sphere, fighting space furries, and the cautionary tale of dealing with Comcast customer support. I missed out on BattleTech when it was first popular, namely because I wasn't alive. But now I am, and I have learned that for $60 I could either buy a box of Warhammer Intercessors and have the models to play 0 games of Warhammer 40k without first purchasing another $60 rulebook and $50 faction codex plus Gamer and Terrain, or have the entire game of BattleTech at the tip of my fingers with this box including cards, dice, a primer for the universe, fold-out maps, a miniature novella to enjoy, $20 worth of models on their website, and 2 battle lances of mechs, plus another army's worth of punch-out cardboard stand-ins, which are, by the way, by all rules, completely game and tournament legal. Read, if you want to play wargaming but aren't sure, or want to get a wargame for your kids on the bit older side, consider starting with a studio that has a policy which actively encourages third-party production of their intellectual property and links you to other stores selling BattleTech models on their own website. The person I was with at the bookstore actually ended up getting this for my birthday, so if you're watching, you know who you are, and you are a Chad. I've also already spent this coupon on more models, so don't even think about trying it. And for the purposes of today's video, I have found exactly what I want to paint. Taking a look at the Honda Civic of battle mechs, I'm painting what the thumbnail says and what 90% of people have clicked away for by now because I'm rambling about space politics. I'm Six Snipes, and today this is the SHD-2H, or Shadowhawk. Let's get painting. And this isn't going to be just painting, but more of a review of both the model and making observations of the quality of miniatures produced by Catalyst versus something more like a Warhammer model. What's nice about these is they come pre-assembled, so no sprue clipping, no gluing required, which is small but to some welcome time-saving mechanics, though I see a lot of people popping the arms and heads apart to pose things differently. I did not, because this is okay with me, but if I had any duplicates, and I like having duplicates in my army because uniformity is cool, I would want different poses. The only real work you need to do on this model is expected from all miniatures, evaluating and removing the mold lines that may have formed where the two halves of the mold come together and form a little bit of resin or plastic material squeezed between them before it managed to set. It's not too hard to get rid of them, but unlike Games Workshop models, these are a little bit more significant. I found that you really have to cut a decent amount with a hobby knife, which makes me nervous, and I didn't catch most of the items in the back, leading me to have to come back and fix it later. Is that the fault of the manufacturer? No, I'm just spoiled. I really didn't see any mold slippage, which is where both halves don't meet properly or an offset. That's not very fixable, and that's certainly more of a bummer when it is, but it's nowhere to be seen on any of these models in the box. They're actually quite very well aligned. I also used a pin vise to drill out a little bit more of the autocannon's barrel to make it more flared and distinct, as well as one of the ports of the long-range missile battery, or LRM, mounted to his chest. They were a little smooshed, presumably due to the molding process, and do reflect on the miniature in my opinion, as it didn't look super fixed once I was done, but ended up painting relatively well. Other than that, the only real concern is making sure the barrel on the autocannon is straight, as it's just going to be a little bit more flimsy being thin as it is, but it's really no big deal. Overall, it's a solid model for what you pay for and is very workable with a nail file or foam sanding sticks if you're me and not brave enough to walk into the women's makeup and accessory aisle. I will give it an 8 out of 10 as for what you pay per miniature, it's very good. The quality is nice. I very much like the sculpt of these new battle mechs, and it looks like it's straight off the cover of a movie poster. And as you will see, they paint very well. Yes, I am using an airbrush for this video. At no point did the video say how to paint these Shadowhawk, and I'm sorry if this is all of a sudden inaccessible for you. I will remind the audience that bitches be paying $70 for half a Dreadnought on Forge World, but won't drop that money on an Iwata Neo dual action, get a shitty desk compressor for the other 60 that they would have used to get the guns sold separately, and then completely change their lives with how much better and faster and smoother you'll get paint on your armies. Seriously, get an airbrush. I started off with Vallejo. That's most paints I'll be using, and so should you, mind you. Very good texture and thins very well with water. This is cold white, not normal white. That basically means there's a little blue in there, and it's much closer to the whitest white you can get. just like me. After figuring out my airbrush wouldn't work because the nozzle looked like this, seriously clean your airbrush, I was able to get a good spray going. I have a dual action Pash TS Talon. It's really nice and more than what you need, but being able to control both airflow and fluid volume is, in my opinion, essential. I still oversprayed a bit and ended up having to wait forever for this plate to dry. It'll look drippy when it finally does, but you don't want to screw with it instead. Anyway, this is a base coat, so it doesn't super matter. It's okay though, because I ended up having to cut and sand off the rest of the mold lines in the back and then recoat them. You might be asking, can you do that? Well, I don't know, but I did. Following up with more Vallejo, we have Prussian blue. It's becoming one of my favorites. It looks like a one-to-one of Citadel's Cantor blue, and that's one of the Crimson Fist colors. I like a good navy color scheme, and for this model, we'll be painting it like House Davion, the mech sub-agency of the Federated Suns, which has the absolutely awe-striking art of the Battlemaster adorned in their colors on the front of the box. It starts with a very dark blue and works its way up to a simply holographic highlight of a very lightning bright indigo. I figure this is a good place to start and build to that. Much like Warhammer, I didn't pick my faction based on lore, rules, and honestly, in respects to the latter, neither should you. I look at all the color schemes out there on YouTube, and there's a lot, and I find what I like. This time I didn't really have to even look further than the front of the box. I mean, look at it. The white undercoat serves to make the blue the brightest, truest version of itself that you would see on the bottle, as all paints to a degree are transparent, and black underpaint results in a more muted look. I then introduced our third paint today, Master Series Paints Core Series 09057 Ashen Blue. In terms of out of the bottle, these really have the best consistency out of anything I've used ever for the pigmentation that you get with it. It has Texas on it, so I don't know if it's sold in the UK, so try Citadel Blue Horror or Vallejo Sky Blue, or don't bother because realistically nobody follows along painting videos, we all just watch to be jealous or whatever. Together, they made more of a cyan blue than I'd have liked, and after adding even more than I initially did the brighter Ashen Blue, it wasn't getting to the results I wanted, so I just threw a little minute quantity of cold white into the mix, and it really showed up then. Watching a model blow up with a zenithal highlight, just getting the tops of everything where the light would hit, really is satisfying, and once it dried, I got a really pretty gradient to work with. From here, the airbrushing required was done, but for the sake of safety, I gave it a fair coat of Vallejo Acrylic Matte Clear Coat to protect the job I've done, and it goes a long way to prevent you from scuffing your miniature or rubbing paint off an edge with your finger by accident. I'm a klutz, so this would help a lot later. I usually crutch on Vallejo game color washes, but my game store didn't stock blue, so I went for an Army Painter Quickshade series blue tone, and with no thinning, just went straight for it. It works great. I brought the model up to a fairly light baby blue, and it needs to be more of a blue, so bring it down with a shader is very good. Yes, it does like mini seek to the edges, but it's also thick enough to have a staying power towards the center of larger surfaces, which gives it a very multi-gradient aesthetic, and it looks amazing. Making sure to get every little bit with my brush, this really contributes towards bringing out all the details in a model. Now we've got to let it dry, and we're ready to do the final general application over the entire body, that being the edge highlight, which will be accomplished with a dry brushing. I mixed Ashen Blue with cold white and enough Prussian to make it match enough to be a brighter version of the color we already have. I then loaded the brush, dumped most of it, and then used the last little bit. Okay, you've seen a dry brushing before, I'm not going to explain this. Look how good it looks. Wow, beautiful, the details, next step. Now we're going to actually consciously paint localized details. This long into the video, you realize I have very hacky ways of getting to the level of detailing on a model, but believe me, it isn't exactly a on a whim sort of time frame, and time savers are time savers. I gotta get in my allotted 2 hours of Fortnite gaming a day that my mom gives me. We're gonna use Vallejo Black, and you can thin yours with water, and that's fine, but I always use Vallejo Glaze Medium, simply because a small quantity of this has marginally thicker texture that simultaneously means it won't be runny and get where I'm not brushing, and also stays wet on a dry palette 2 to 3 times longer easily. Now realizing a lot of these details are very small on this mold, and often between and under 2 or more bits that I don't want to be black or whatever color I'm currently brushing, so there's a lot of maneuvering, least of which being these little air vents here, more so the waistline, the arm sockets that I wanted to be darker, and the cockpit. The AC-10 was easy though, that's this gun here. Finally, I ringed the backward section of the medium laser on the arm with black, and this is actually ironically the only place I messed up, which was ultimately okay, being that the bit was going to be covered with Vallejo Air Silver. Yes, it's airbrush silver, but the metallic flakes are enough to thicken it and adhere to the point where it will paint on perfectly and very smooth. It's one of my paint essentials. This was even more challenging. I did the backward jump jets, which allow the battle mech to boost itself high into the air, which was a good warm-up because I then did the in-between hinge sections of the legs, which are very tediously between significant bits of thigh and calf, but that largely went okay. Along with the hands, just the individual fingers, not the palms of the wrists, top of the helmet, and autocannon barrel, of which I left a length of blue because it looks cool. Finally, I did the LRM battery on the chest. With these 2 colors for details alone, you really see this mech coming together, and with the silver, mistakes are easily matched masked by the fact that I would then dull it down with a Citadel Nuln oil wash to give it a more oily machine aesthetic that I love. And here, earnestly, if you're following along, stopping is perfectly acceptable. This is a battle-ready, mean-looking mech, and I would love to play against someone whose army looks exactly like this. With simple coats sprayed on and a little brushwork past the shading step, you really can achieve a great result. And I see other wargaming channels doing this exact mech exactly that way, and they look great too, and that's to the credit of the awesome sculpt for the model. So this is a great place to leave off. But I'm a perfectionist loser with an obsessively expanding skill set, so I'm gonna flex on YouTube and start freehanding details. I'm gonna put stripes on mine, just like the one on the box, and they're going to go on the center chest piece, which I framed with an extra helping of blue tone to really deepen the contrast of what will be bright red and white. Bringing in Vallejo Sky Gray, this one will also be thinned with Glaze medium and then used as an undercoat, which will also be applied very carefully and lightly to form a thin circle on the right arm shoulder pad. Why?
That's a surprise tool that can help us later.
I then proceeded to whip out my very nicest horsehair brush, a whole $4 at Hobby Lobby, so we ballin', and I used it to start writing number designations on the opposite shoulder. I just chose a number and went with it. It took multiple attempts, and later I came back with some mixed blue to clean up some of the lines, but overall this would look very nice. I also did it on the side of the chest plate and began to completely botch writing on the lower half of the torso as well. I then came in with cold white and used the good old 2 thin coats to establish the white stripe that I wanted before moving on to Vallejo Scarlet to do the red stripe. I then mixed it a little with white to make a lighter red and did some highlights on it and used that to block in the circle I established before. House Davion has a cool logo with a sword over a sun, and I like swords, and I guess stars are cool too, but I don't want to buy 3mm transfers on eBay. Luckily, being too poor to buy stickers is a good incentive to learn how to freehand, and I've been doing this with Imperial Fist since I got into Warhammer. This is not going to be hard for me. I mixed varying levels of Vallejo Scarlet and flat yellow to work my way from the red exterior to the bright yellow interior we see, and there's multiple renditions of the logo with varying gradients, so I just made up my own mind and left it yellow in the center without a star or anything like it has here. Rather importantly, I then gave it a matte clear coat to protect what I just worked probably 20 minutes on and proceeded to mess up the first attempt at a sword, hence why there's a clear coat, because I then can just scratch it off and go again, which I did and finessed that shit. Finally, I highlighted the letters of all the details with a little white and remixed enough blue to cover the dumpster fire on the front and redo that to make it look acceptable. Spare yellow went to dotting the SRM battery mounted to the head canopy, making those deceptively lethal weapons have a little pop of warning color. Now for the canopy. Rather than using actual colors, I'm going to mix white and gray. The very brightest white lines, 2 opposite corners on each panel, and builds down to black in the center. Finally, I used Citadel's Blood Angel's red contrast to make the cockpit red just like in the picture. The clearness of it meant the levels of the grayscale cockpit remain to accentuate the red and make it have very nice highlights. I also forgot to do the side panels of the head at all, so I had to come back and do both of them, but whatever. Now, all that's left is to look at it. It's very nice. This might be my best miniature I've ever done. Yes, there's a base, but this video is long enough, and I'm going to be basing a ton of other miniatures like that, so I'm not going to explain it in every video. There will be a separate upload tutorial on how to do that, because as a YouTuber, it is my job to leech as much of your time and viewership as humanly possible. This is a new channel of mine, so if you like the video, please feel free to touch all the buttons, and I'm going to go stare at my battle mech and flex on some kids at the game store.